The church air was thick, heavy with the cloying scent of lilies and old, polished wood. It was a smell I associated with endings, with finality. Sunlight, fractured into 100 pieces of jewel-toned light, streamed through the stained-glass saints who gazed down with serene, unknowing eyes. They watched over a congregation of the bereaved, their faces a collective mask of somber respect. From my seat in the last pew, a ghost tucked away in the shadows. I watched them too. I watched them weep for a man who did not deserve a single one of their tears. The place was packed for the funeral of David Anderson. Every important face in Havenwood, Vermont was here, their presence a testament to the man they thought they knew. They called him a pillar of the community, a loving husband, a devoted father. The whispers that reached me were reverent, painting a portrait of a life well lived, a legacy of integrity. A lie. Every word was a lie, polished to a high shine like the mahogany of his casket. I sat on the hard oak, my spine straight, my hands folded tightly in my lap over my simple black purse. My knuckles were white. The organ played a low, mournful dirge, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep in my bones. But it stirred nothing in my heart. There was no sorrow there, only a vast, hollow cavern carved out decades ago. I didn't cry because the world had lost a great man. I cried for the 16-year-old girl he had buried alive, right here in this town, under the weight of its good opinions and pious judgments. I cried for the girl whose grave he had danced on for 50 years. That girl was me. A hush fell over the church as a woman made her way to the lectern. She was elegant, composed, her dark hair perfectly coiffed, her black dress tailored to suggest a grief that was tasteful, not messy. To the rest of the world, she was Lily Anderson, the grieving daughter. To me, she was the first person who had helped her father shovel the dirt onto my coffin. She placed her manicured hands on the sides of the lectern, taking a moment to breathe, to gather herself. A well-rehearsed pause. I knew all her pauses. I had studied them across a lifetime of imagined confrontations. "Thank you all for coming," Lily began, her voice a soft, cultured tremor that carried through the cavernous space. "To see so many people here today, it is a profound comfort. It shows how many lives my father, David Anderson, touched. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, an ancient, familiar ice. I watched her face, the face that was once the other half of my own. We had been inseparable, Lily and I. Our names were a single word in the halls of our high school, Lily and Emma. Her home had been my home, her family, my sanctuary, and her father. He had been the sun around which my lonely little world had orbitated. My father was a man of principle," Lily continued, her eyes scanning the crowd, her gaze sorrowful and proud. "He taught me the meaning of integrity, of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. He was my rock, my guide. When I stumbled, he was there to lift me up. When I was lost, he showed me the way home." A bitter taste, sharp as bile, rose in my throat. He showed me the way home. I remembered the winding path to her house, the one I could walk with, my eyes closed. I remembered the scent of Mrs. Anderson's baking, the sound of their laughter, the feeling of belonging that was so potent it almost hurt. He hadn't just shown me the way to their home. He had made it my world. And then he had set that world on fire. My hands began to tremble. It wasn't the feeble tremor of old age, the one that sometimes made it difficult to hold a teacup steady. This was different. It was a vibration that started deep within me, a seismic memory of a terror so profound it had reshaped my soul. It was rage. A rage so old and so cold it felt less like a fire and more like a glacier. Slow, immense, and capable of grinding mountains to dust. "He loved this town," Lily said, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. It was part of the performance. He believed in Havenwood. He believed in the goodness of its people. He built his life here. He built his family here. And he gave back to this community with his whole heart. The hypocrisy was a physical force, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. He hadn't given back. He had taken. He was a predator who wore the camouflage of a philanthropist. He used his good deeds as a shield, his charm as a weapon. And this town, in its desperate need for heroes, had gladly held that shield for him, deflecting the truth whenever it dared to surface. I looked away from Lily, my gaze drifting to the stained glass window nearest me. It depicted a shepherd holding a lamb, his expression beatific. I used to love these windows. I used to think they were beautiful. Now, all I saw was the vulnerability of the lamb, the absolute power of the shepherd. I saw the lie in the gentle curve of his smile. I thought of my own parents, long gone now. They were good people, I suppose, but they were distant, caught up in their own quiet struggles. They provided a roof and food, but the rooms of our house were filled with silence. The Anderson house was the opposite. It was overflowing with life, with noise, with an easy affection I craved like a starving person craves bread. Sarah, Lily's mother, with her soft hands and endless supply of cookies, and David, who had looked at me with such warmth, who had called me his second daughter, who had listened to my dreams and fears with an attentiveness my own father never managed. He had seen the empty spaces inside me. He had seen my desperate need for a father's approval, and he had used it. He had twisted that need into a weapon against me. Lily was nearing the end of her eulogy. Her voice swelled with emotion, a carefully constructed crescendo designed to break the hearts of everyone present. He was not a perfect man. No one is, she conceded, a masterful touch of feigned humility. But he was a good man, a great man, and I will miss him every day for the rest of my life. Goodbye, Daddy. I love you. A collective sigh of sympathy swept through the church. Muffled sobs broke the silence. The organ began to play again, a soft, respectful melody to accompany the daughter's return to her seat in the front pew, next to her mother, Sarah, who sat like a stone statue, her grief unreadable. I remained still, anchored to my seat by the sheer weight of the unsaid truth. They were all mourning a phantom, a carefully crafted illusion. The real David Anderson was a monster, and I was the only person in this building who knew the full extent of his monstrosity. They were burying a man's body, but I had been living in the tomb he built for my spirit for half a century. The ushers began to direct the pews, row by row, for a final viewing of the casket. The line formed slowly, a shuffling, sniffling procession of the deceived. I did not move. I had seen enough of David Anderson to last a lifetime. I had no desire to look upon the waxy, peaceful mask his corpse now wore. There was no peace in my memory of him. As the crowd thinned, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't have to look. I knew. After all this time, I still knew her shape in the air around me. Lily was standing in the aisle, looking down at me. Her face, up close, was a network of fine lines around her eyes and mouth. The years had been kind to her, but they hadn't been entirely absent. "Emma?" she said, her voice a low whisper of disbelief. "Is that you?" I lifted my head, my eyes meeting hers for the first time in decades. The recognition in her face warred with a confusion, a flicker of something else. Fear? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. "Hello, Lily," I said. My voice was steady, betraying none of the glacial fury churning inside me. I had no idea you were here. I didn't know you were even in Vermont," she stammered, recovering some of her composure. "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't I say something?" The question was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the reality of our shared history that I almost laughed. The sound that escaped my lips was dry, brittle. It didn't seem like the right time to catch up, I replied, my voice flat. Her expression hardened slightly. The polished grief was momentarily replaced by a flash of the old, defensive anger I remembered so well. You look, well, she said, though it sounded like an accusation, and your father looks very peaceful, I said, my gaze flicking towards the front of the church. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. For a moment, the church, the mourners, the organ musicit, all faded away. We were just two women in an aisle, an old woman and a middle-aged one, with the ghost of a terrible truth standing between us. She saw an unwelcome guest at her father's funeral. I saw the architect of my exile. She opened her mouth to say something else, but then seemed to think better of it. She simply gave a tight, dismissive nod, turned, and walked back towards the front pew, her spine ramrod straight. She had a legacy to protect. I watched her go. I stayed in my seat until the last of the mourners had shuffled past the casket, until the church was nearly empty, filled only with the scent of dying flowers and the lingering echoes of 1,000 lies. My hands had finally stopped trembling. They were perfectly still, resting in my lap. And in that stillness, a decision, made years ago but dormant for so long, finally crystallized. This was not the end of the story. For them, it was a day of closure, of laying a man to rest. For me, it was something else entirely. It was a beginning. Seeing Lily's face in that church, even etched with the fine lines of age and feigned sorrow, sent me tumbling back through time. The years collapsed in on themselves, and the cold, hollow cavern of the present was suddenly filled with the warmth of a sun-drenched memory. I was 16 again, and I was on my way home. Not to my own house, but to the Andersons', to the only place that had ever truly felt like one. My own home was a place of echoes and quiet hallways. We lived in a modest clapboard house on the other side of town, a place kept meticulously clean but utterly devoid of life. My father was a quiet man who worked long hours at the lumber mill, returning home smelling of sawdust and exhaustion. My mother was a creature of routine, her days measured by chores and errands, her conversations rarely venturing beyond the practicalities of dinner or laundry. They weren't unkind, but their love was a pale, watery thing, a dutiful affection that provided for my needs but never touched my soul. I was a latchkey kid before the term was common, letting myself into an empty house every afternoon, the silence my only companion until the sound of my mother's car crunched on the gravel driveway hours later. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of a family that operated around me, but rarely with me. The Anderson house was the antithesis of mine. It was a grander colonial on Maple Street, with a sprawling green lawn and a porch swing that was always in gentle motion. But the real difference wasn't in the architecture, it was in the air. The moment you stepped inside, life enveloped you. There was always music playing from a radio in the kitchen, the scent of something baking cinnamon, chocolate, vanilla, and the sound of laughter. It was a house that was lived in, a house that breathed, and at the heart of that house was Lily. Lily, with her bright, easy smile and a confidence that drew people to her like moths to a flame. We were an unlikely pair. She was the sun, and I was the quiet satellite drawn into her orbit. But she saw something in me, a steadfastness, a loyalty, that she valued. In her presence, I wasn't the shy, invisible girl from the silent house. I was her other half. We were Lily and Emma. We spent hours in her sprawling bedroom, the floor littered with magazines and record sleeves, sharing secrets whispered so quietly they barely disturbed the air. We planned our futures, mapped out our dream lives, convinced that we would be neighbours forever, our children growing up as best friends, just like us. Her dreams were bold and bright travel, a career in the city. Mine was simpler, All I ever really dreamed of was a life that felt like hers. I remember one autumn afternoon, with a clarity that still aches. We were supposed to be studying for a history exam, but we were mostly just listening to music, the vinyl spinning with a soft crackle. The light outside was golden, the kind that makes everything feel hopeful and eternal. Sarah, Lily's mother, came in carrying a tray with 2 tall glasses of milk and a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. She had a soft, flower-dusted warmth about her, a gentle smile that made you feel instantly cared for. "Studying hard, or hardly studying?" she asked. The question a familiar, comfortable refrain. "We're absorbing it through osmosis, Mom," Lily said with a grin, grabbing a cookie. "Well, make sure you absorb some of this too," Sarah said, setting the tray down. She brushed a stray piece of hair from my forehead, a casual, maternal touch that sent a jolt of warmth straight to my core. "Don't let Lily talk your ear off so much you forget to eat, Emma." "I won't, Mrs. Anderson," I said, my voice soft with gratitude. That small moment, so simple and unremarkable, was everything to me. It was a gesture of belonging. It was the food my soul was starving for. Later that evening, the front door opened and a new energy filled the house. David Anderson was home. If Sarah was the gentle heart of the home, David was its vibrant, charismatic son. He was a handsome man, his smile quick and infectious, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. Lily flew down the stairs to greet him, and he swung her around in a big hug, his laughter booming through the entryway. I watched from the top of the stairs, feeling a familiar pang of longing. He saw me hovering there. His smile widened. "Well, look who it is," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Don't be a stranger, Emma. Come down and say hello." I descended the stairs slowly, suddenly shy. He always had this effect on me. He made me feel seen. While my own father's gaze often slid past me, David's attention was a focused, powerful beam. "How was your day?" I asked quietly. "Long," he said, loosening his tie. "But it's always better when I come home and see my 2 favorite girls." He looked from Lily to me, his gaze lingering on me for a fraction of a second longer. "And how's my second daughter doing today? I heard you had a big math test." "How did it go?" He remembered. I had mentioned it in passing days ago. A throwaway comment about being nervous. My own father hadn't asked. My mother had likely forgotten. But David Anderson remembered. It was a small thing, a tiny detail, but to a girl who felt largely invisible, it was everything. It made me feel like I mattered, like I had a place. "It was okay, I think," I said, a blush creeping up my neck. "I think I did well." "Of course you did," he said with absolute certainty, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You're a smart girl, the smartest one in that school, including this one," he added, winking at Lily, who playfully rolled her eyes. That night, Sarah insisted I stay for dinner. This was a common occurrence. I ate at their table more often than I ate at my own. My parents never minded. I think they were relieved to have one less mouth to worry about for an evening. Sitting at that dinner table was like watching a performance of the perfect family. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter. David would tell stories about his day at the bank, making even the driest subjects sound fascinating. He would ask Lily about her friends, about school, and he would always make a point of including me, asking my opinion, drawing me into the circle of their warmth. I would sit there, bathed in the glow of their affection, a quiet, grateful guest in their paradise. I listened to the rhythm of their lives, memorizing it, wishing I could absorb it into my own DNA. I mistook their kindness for safety. I mistook his attention for fatherly love. To me, David Anderson wasn't just my best friend's father. He was the father I wished I had. He was strong, successful, charming, and kind. He was my hero. Walking home on those evenings, the air crisp and cool against my warm cheeks, I would carry the feeling of their house with me like a shield. The silence of my own home didn't feel as lonely. The distance of my own parents didn't hurt as much. I had the Andersons. I had a place where I belonged. My heart would be so full it felt like it might burst. I remember one particular night, looking back at their house from the end of the street. The windows were golden squares of light, and I could see their silhouettes moving inside. A family, whole and happy. I felt a profound sense of peace, a certainty that everything was going to be all right. I was safe. I was loved. It was, I think, the last time in my life I ever felt truly, completely, and blissfully ignorant. I didn't know that I was not a second daughter. I didn't know that to the man inside that house, I was not a child to be protected, but a prize to be hunted. I was basking in the warmth of a fire, never realizing that its only purpose was to eventually consume me. Trust is a fragile thing. It isn't loud or dramatic in its breaking. There is no shattering sound, no sudden explosion. It is a silent, insidious process. You don't even realize it's gone until you reach for it and find only a cold, empty space where its warmth used to be. For me, the first hairline fracture appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The air had turned crisp, and the famous Vermont leaves were a riot of red and gold, a beautiful dying flame against a brilliant blue sky. I was in the Andersons' kitchen, waiting for Lily to get back from a student council meeting. I was supposed to be starting our homework, but mostly I was just enjoying the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the comforting scent of Sarah's pot roast simmering in the oven. The house was my safe harbour, and I felt a familiar sense of peace settle over me. Then David came home early. He walked in through the back door, shrugging off his suit jacket, and his smile lit up the room just as it always did. "Emma, my favourite after-school guest," he said, his voice a warm, easy rumble. "Don't tell Lily I said that." I smiled back, a genuine, happy reflex. "Your secret's safe with me, Mr. Anderson." "Good." He walked to the sink to wash his hands, his back to me. "Sarah's out running errands. Lily shouldn't be too much longer." He dried his hands and turned, leaning against the counter and studying me. The silence stretched for a moment, and his expression shifted. The broad, fatherly smile softened into something quieter, more focused, more intense. "You know, Emma," he said, his voice a little lower than before, "that colour looks lovely on you. Blue brings out your eyes." It was a simple compliment, the kind anyone could give. But it wasn't his words. It was his gaze. It didn't stop at my face. I felt it travel down, over my simple blue sweater, my developing chest, and linger for a beat before returning to my eyes. A hot, uncomfortable blush spread up my neck and across my cheeks. I suddenly felt exposed, as if I were standing there in my underwear. I mumbled a thank you and looked down at my history textbook, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "You're growing up so fast," he continued, his voice still soft. "You're not a little girl anymore. You're turning into a beautiful young woman." Every instinct in my body screamed at me. This was wrong. The words were paternal, but the feeling behind them was not. It felt possessive, appraising. I felt like a butterfly being watched by a collector, my wings admired just before the pin went through. I kept my eyes glued to the page, pretending to be engrossed in a paragraph about the American Revolution. I prayed for Lily to burst through the door. That was the first time, the first chill in the warm air of my sanctuary. After that, things began to change in ways so subtle I thought I was losing my mind. A hand on my shoulder to guide me through a doorway would slide down to the small of my back, his fingers pressing just a little too firmly. If I passed him in the narrow upstairs hallway, he would stand his ground, forcing me to squeeze past him, my body brushing against his for a second too long. Each time, if I flinched or stiffened, he would pull back with a look of wounded confusion. "What's wrong?" he'd ask, his brow furrowed with concern. "Emma, did I do something?" And I, filled with a confusing mix of fear and guilt, would quickly shake my head. "No, sorry. I'm just jumpy today. Don't be silly," he'd say, his charming smile returning, and he would pat my arm paternally. "Your family. You know you're safe here." He was a master of it, this psychological sleight of hand. He would create a situation that filled me with a creeping dread, and then, with a single look or a kind word, he would make me feel like I was the one who was crazy, ungrateful, or dirty-minded for misinterpreting his affection. He was teaching me to distrust my own instincts. He was isolating me inside my own head. I started to make excuses to avoid being at the house alone. I'd wait for Lily on the porch swing instead of inside. If she went upstairs, I'd find a reason to busy myself in the living room, in the open, where Sarah might walk through at any moment. I became a strategist in a war only I knew I was fighting. My anxiety was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my days. Lily noticed the change, but she saw it through the lens of our friendship. "You're so quiet lately, Em," she said one day, nudging me. "Is everything okay? You're not mad at me, are you?" "Of course not," I said, forcing a smile. "Just stressed about school." It was the first of 1,000 lies I would learn to tell to protect a secret that was slowly poisoning me. The final, undeniable horror came on a Friday night in November. A cold rain was lashing against the windows. Lily and I were working on a diorama for biology, a project we'd left to the last minute. We were in the den, a cozy, wood-panelled room at the back of the house. By 10 o'clock, Lily was yawning, her energy spent. "I can't keep my eyes open," she announced, stretching. "Are you almost done with the trees?" "Almost," I said, carefully gluing fake moss to a piece of driftwood. "You go on up. I'll finish this and clean up." "You're the best," she said, giving my shoulder a squeeze before heading upstairs. "Mom and Dad are out at a dinner thing, but they should be home soon. Just let yourself out." The house grew quiet after she left, the only sounds the rhythmic drumming of the rain and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. For a little while, I felt a sense of relief. I was alone. I could breathe. I finished the last tree and was carefully arranging the tiny plastic animals when I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps in the hall. My body went rigid. "Still at it?" David's voice came from the doorway. I looked up, my heart seizing in my chest. He was alone. Sarah wasn't with him. He was shrugging off his wet raincoat, his hair slicked back from the rain. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were dark, watchful. "I just finished," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I started to gather up the glue and scraps of paper, my movements suddenly clumsy. I was just about to clean up and head out. "No rush," he said, walking into the room. He didn't turn on the main overhead light, leaving us in the cozy, intimate glow of the single lamp on the desk. He walked over to the diorama, pretending to inspect my work. "This looks fantastic. You're a talented girl, Emma." He was standing too close. I could smell the rain on his coat and something else. The faint, sharp scent of whiskey. I kept my head down, focusing on screwing the cap back on the glue. "Thank you. Lily's lucky to have you," he said. He moved, and suddenly he was behind me, his hands landing on my shoulders. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. This was different from the casual touches before. His grip was firm, possessive. "Mr. Anderson, I started," my voice trembling. "Shh," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "It's David, remember? We're family." His hands began to move, kneading my shoulders, then sliding down my arms. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. My mind was screaming. A silent, frantic shriek. Run! Get out! Scream! But my body was paralyzed with terror. This was Mr. Anderson. My hero. My second father. This couldn't be happening. He turned me around to face him. The charming mask was gone completely. His face was hard, his eyes filled with a hunger that terrified me. This was a stranger, a predator wearing the face of the man I trusted most in the world. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "Please don't," I whimpered, tears springing to my eyes. It was a pathetic sound, a kitten's mew against a thunderstorm. "Don't be scared," he murmured, but his voice was not reassuring. It was the voice of a man who was getting exactly what he wanted. "You're so beautiful, so perfect." And then he kissed me. It was not a kiss of affection. It was an act of consumption, brutal and suffocating. It was the taste of whiskey and betrayal. My mind fractured. One part of me was screaming, fighting, but my limbs were heavy, useless, disconnected from my brain. Another part of me simply floated away, leaving my body behind, watching from a great, cold distance as my childhood was burned to the ground. He pressed me back against the desk, his body heavy and insistent, his hands moving over me, claiming, violating. The diorama we had worked so hard on tumbled to the floor with a soft crash, our fragile miniature world breaking apart. I don't know how long it lasted. When he finally stepped back, his breathing was heavy. He looked at me, my face streaked with tears, my body trembling uncontrollably. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eye spanic. Perhaps, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He smoothed his hair back, straightened his shirt. "You should go home now, Emma," he said, his voice eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. "It's getting late." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, at the monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. I fumbled for my coat, my book bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my jacket. I ran from that room. I ran through the hallway, past the grandfather clock that ticked on, oblivious. I threw open the front door and ran out into the cold, cleansing rain. I ran all the way home, the sound of my own ragged sobs lost in the storm. I let myself into my dark, silent house. But the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with him, with his smell, his touch, his voice. The sanctuary had become the trap. The hero had become the monster. And I, the girl who had wanted nothing more than to be part of their family, was now the keeper of a secret that would burn inside me, alone in the dark. A secret like the one I now carried isn't a static thing. It's not an object you can hide in a box or a memory you can lock away in a dusty corner of your mind. It is alive. It has a heartbeat that thrums in your own veins, a breath that whispers against your neck in the dead of night. It follows you from room to room, a malevolent shadow you can't outrun. It sits with you at the dinner table, making your food taste like ash. It lies next to you in bed, stealing your sleep. It eats you from the inside out, slowly, methodically, until you are nothing but a hollow shell around the festering thing you hold. In the days that followed that night, my world shrank to the four walls of my bedroom. I feigned a vicious flu, a lie my parents accepted with their usual lack of probing questions. My mother would leave a tray of food outside my door: soup, toast, things that required little effort from either of us. Most of it went untouched. I couldn't eat. The very thought of food made my stomach churn with a nausea that had nothing to do with sickness and everything to do with shame. I spent hours in the shower, scrubbing my skin with a ferocity that left it raw and red, but I could not wash the feeling of his hands off me. I couldn't wash away the scent of his whiskey-laced breath, or the memory of his weight pressing me down. The violation wasn't on my skin, it was under it. It had seeped into my bloodstream. A permanent contaminant. At night, I would jolt awake from nightmares I couldn't fully remember, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. The phone rang constantly. Lily. Her calls were a relentless summons back to a world I no longer belonged to. At first, her voice on the answering machine was filled with concern. Em, it's me again. I'm worried about you. Are you sure it's just the flu? Call me. After a few days, the concern began to curdle into annoyance. Okay, this isn't funny anymore, Emma. Are you mad at me? If I did something, just tell me. You can't just disappear. On the fourth day, she appeared at my front door, her face a thundercloud of worry and impatience. My mother let her in, and she marched straight up to my room, pushing the door open without knocking. I was sitting on my bed, staring at the wall, and I flinched as if she had struck me. What is wrong with you? She demanded, her hands on her hips. The sight of her, so vibrant and whole and blissfully unaware, was like a physical blow. I told you, I'm sick, I mumbled, pulling my blanket tighter around me. A useless shield. This isn't sick, Emma. This is weird, she said, her voice softening slightly as she took in my appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I seemed to have shrunk into myself. You look terrible. Talk to me. Did something happen? For a single, agonizing moment, the truth burned on my tongue. The words were right there, a scream waiting to be released. Your father happened. But I looked at her face, her earnest, trusting face, and the words died. How could I say them? How could I detonate a bomb in the center of her perfect life? Telling her would mean destroying her. Her family, her father, her entire world, it would all turn to ash. And in the twisted logic of my traumatized mind, I felt a horrific sense of responsibility to protect her from the man who had hurt me. It's nothing, I said, the lie tasting like poison. I'm just tired. My parents have been fighting. It was a weak, pathetic excuse, but it was all I had. Lily's expression shifted from concern to a kind of exasperated pity. Oh, well, why didn't you just say that? She sat on the edge of my bed, her anger deflating. You know you can always talk to me, Em. You know my family is your family. The irony of her words was a knife twisting in my gut. I could only nod, unable to meet her eyes. Returning to school was like walking onto a battlefield, unarmed and already wounded. Every hallway was a potential ambush. Every corner, a threat. I tried to make myself invisible, keeping my head down, my books clutched to my chest like armor. But he found me. Of course he found me. It was on Tuesday, between third and fourth period. The hall was a chaotic river of students. I was fumbling with my locker combination when a hand closed on my arm. My blood ran cold. I didn't have to look. We need to talk, David said, his voice low and urgent. He had appeared out of nowhere, dressed in his impeccable suit. I was just dropping off some papers for the school board. Another lie. Another convenient coincidence. He steered me out of the main current of students and into a small, empty alcove under a stairwell. His grip was like steel. Let go of me, I whispered, my voice shaking. Not until you listen, he hissed, his face hardening. The charming community leader was gone, replaced by the cold-eyed monster from the den. I know you've been avoiding Lily. I know you've been acting strangely. You need to stop. I can't, I choked out. You will, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that cut through my fear. I want you to think very carefully, Emma. If you were to say something, anything, who do you think they would believe? Me? Or a quiet, emotional teenage girl who has always been a little dramatic. I am a respected man in this town. You are a child. I will say you're confused. I will say you have a crush on me and you're making things up because you're jealous of Lily. I will say whatever I have to say, and they will believe me. You will lose everything. Your reputation. Your friends. Lily will never speak to you again. Is that what you want? Every word was a carefully aimed dart, each one finding its mark. He laid out my own deepest fears and served them back to me as a promise. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He was right. Who would believe me? The whole town loved him. Even my own parents were impressed by him. I would be utterly, completely alone. He saw the surrender in my eyes, the fight draining out of me. His grip on my arm loosened. "Good girl," he murmured, his tone shifting again. He was in control. His next move came a few days later. He found another opportunity, this time catching me after school as I was walking home. His car pulled up beside me, the passenger window gliding down. "Emma, please," he said, his face a mask of profound anguish. "Just for a minute." Wary, terrified, but feeling I had no choice. I stopped. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine remorse. "I don't know what came over me the other night. I've been under so much pressure at work. I had too much to drink. It was a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. And it will never, ever happen again. I swear it on my life." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Please, Emma, you have the power to destroy my life. My family, Sarah and Lily, they would be devastated. Please don't punish them for my weakness. Don't ruin everything over one moment of madness." And there it was. The final, perfect turn of the screw. He had transformed his crime into my burden. He made his secret my responsibility. In his first attack, he had threatened me with my own destruction. In this one, he threatened me with the destruction of others, of the very people I cared about. He had built the bars of my prison, and now he was tricking me into locking the door myself. That weekend, Lily insisted I come over for dinner. "No more excuses," she had said. "Mom is making your favorite lasagna. You have to come." To refuse again would have been too suspicious. So I went. Walking into that house again was a physical ordeal. The air I once breathed so freely now felt thick as mud, suffocating me. The familiar scent of baking garlic bread turned my stomach. I sat on their comfortable living room couch, a guest in the home of my tormentor, and watched him. I watched him kiss Sarah on the cheek. I watched him laugh at one of Lily's jokes. I watched him be the perfect husband, the perfect father, and I felt the secret in the room, coiled in the corner like a serpent, a monster only I could see. He looked over at me and gave me a small conspiratorial smile, a look that said, "This is our secret. Be a good girl and keep it." I felt a cold dread wash over me. This was my life now, a performance. A double life where I smiled and pretended everything was fine, while inside, the living, breathing secret was slowly, surely eating me alive. There was no escape. This house was my prison now, and my warden had just invited me for dinner. You can't scream when your throat is paralyzed by fear. But you try. You scream in other ways. You scream with your eyes, with the tensing of your muscles, with the frantic, silent language of a body held hostage. I tried to tell her, I tried to tell Lily, not with the words I knew she would reject, but with the thousand small flinches and hesitations that had become my new vocabulary. But some people are so invested in the beauty of a painting, they refuse to see the rot in the canvas. Lily didn't just refuse to see it. She stood guard over it, ready to attack anyone who even hinted at its existence. My life settled into a horrifying new rhythm. I was still Emma, Lily's best friend. I still went to their house, did homework at their kitchen table, and ate their food. But I was also a different person now. A tightrope walker navigating a high wire of terror. My senses were perpetually on high alert. I developed a kind of sixth sense for David's presence. I knew the sound of his car in the driveway, the specific weight of his footstep on the stairs, the way the air in a room seemed to compress when he entered it. My screams were quiet things. At the dinner table, if he was telling a story and his hand casually brushed the back of my chair, I would recoil as if from a hot flame, my posture instantly rigid. I would see Lily's brow furrow in confusion from across the table, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. I would see Sarah, her mother, notice my reaction and then immediately look down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern of her fork tines on the mashed potatoes. Her silence was a scream too, but one of terrified complicity. One afternoon, the three of us were in the living room. Sarah was knitting, Lily was reading a magazine, and I was pretending to read a book. David walked in, and I felt my entire body clench. He sat down in the armchair opposite me, his gaze settling on me. "That's a very serious expression, Emma," he said, his voice laced with that false paternal charm. "Worried about that chemistry test?" "Just studying," I mumbled, not looking up. "You study too hard," he continued. "You need to have more fun. A pretty girl like you shouldn't be cooped up with books all the time." The compliment, seemingly innocuous, felt like a violation. It was a reminder of his ownership, a public assertion of his private observations. I felt my cheeks flush with shame. My eyes darted to Sarah, a desperate, silent plea. "Do you hear this? Do you see?" For a split second, her knitting needles paused. Her lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. And then, without missing a beat, she looked at Lily and said, "Lily, dear, did you remember to call your grandmother today?" The subject was changed. The moment was buried. My scream was absorbed by the thick, comfortable upholstery of their denial. My most desperate and most disastrous attempt came a week later. Lily and I were in her bedroom, the one place that had always been our inviolable sanctuary. She was trying on a new dress for an upcoming school dance, twirling in front of her full-length mirror. I was sitting on her bed, trying to appear normal, trying to conjure the easy enthusiasm she expected of me. She stopped twirling and looked at my reflection in the mirror, her expression serious. "Okay, you have to tell me what's going on." "Nothing's going on," I said automatically. "Don't lie to me, Emma," she said, turning to face me. "You've been weird for weeks. And it's always worse when my dad is around. You act like you're scared of him. What is your deal?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Here it was. A door, cracked open just enough for a sliver of truth to pass through. I had to try. My survival depended on it. I took a shaky breath. "I'm not scared." "Exactly," I began, my voice trembling. "It's just, sometimes, the way he looks at me, or the things he says. It makes me feel uncomfortable." The words, so small and inadequate, felt enormous. A betrayal of the hospitality I had been shown for years. I watched Lily's face, praying for a sign of understanding, of belief. I saw none. Her expression hardened instantly, her eyes going cold. "Uncomfortable?" she repeated, the word dripping with disbelief and scorn. "My father, who treats you like you're his own daughter, who asks about your tests and worries about you, and tells everyone how smart you are. That makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like a father," I whispered, the words tearing at my throat. It was the closest I could get to the truth. It was a fatal mistake. Lily's face flushed with anger. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped, her voice rising. "What are you trying to say, Emma?" That he's coming on to you? Is that it? Are you really that desperate for attention? No, that's not. Because that's what it sounds like. She cut me off, taking a step towards me, her body radiating fury. It sounds like you're trying to create some sick, twisted drama because you can't stand that I have a happy family. My dad is a good man, the best man I know. He has done nothing but be kind to you, and in return, you're going to sit in my room and accuse him of being some kind of creep. Do you have any idea how disgusting and ungrateful that sounds? Each word was a slap in the face. She wasn't just denying my reality, she was twisting it, recasting me as the villain of the story. I was the liar, the drama queen, the ungrateful orphan trying to poison the well from which I so freely drank. I could see the narrative hardening in her eyes, the story she was telling herself to protect the perfect painting of her father. I stared at her, speechless, a wave of cold desolation washing over me. There was no room for my truth in her world. She would burn me to the ground to protect her father's image. I don't want to hear another word about it, she said, her voice dropping to a low, final command. Whatever weird fantasy you have going on in your head, you keep it there. Do you understand me? Don't you ever, ever say anything against my father again. I could only nod. A single, jerky motion. The scream that had been lodged in my throat for weeks collapsed inward, imploding into a dense, silent knot of despair in my stomach. The door hadn't just been slammed shut. It had been bolted, barred, and barricaded. I sat on her bed, in the heart of our dead friendship, and understood the terms of my survival. Silence. Silence was the price of admission. To stay in her life, to remain in the orbit of the only family I had ever loved, I had to swallow my own screams. I had to agree to the lie. I had to become a willing accomplice in my own erasure, pretending the rot in the canvas wasn't there, even as I could feel it spreading, consuming everything. After the confrontation in Lily's bedroom, a fragile, unspoken truce settled between us. The terms were simple. I would be silent, and she would be kind. Our friendship became a hollowed-out thing, a beautiful, empty seashell. We still looked the part. We walked to school together. We sat at the same lunch table. We went to the Andersons' house, but the intimacy, the shared soul of our connection, was gone. It had been sacrificed at the altar of her father's pristine image. The seasons turned. The vibrant, fiery death of autumn gave way to the cold, stark silence of a Vermont winter. The world outside grew quiet and grey, a perfect mirror for the landscape of my inner life. My existence became a series of careful calculations and evasive maneuvers. I learnt to read the subtle shifts in David's moods, to anticipate his movements, to make myself scarce when the predatory glint returned to his eyes. The abuse didn't stop, but it became a grim, sporadic pattern, a thing of horrifying opportunity. A moment alone in the kitchen, a time when he knew Sarah was out and Lily was occupied upstairs. Each instance was a fresh trauma, another layer of filth packed onto my soul, reinforcing the suffocating reality of my entrapment. I was living in a constant low-grade state of terror, a prisoner of war in a conflict no one else knew was being waged. Then, my body began to betray me. There are some truths your body tells before your mind is ready to accept them. You can lie to yourself, you can bargain with reality, you can build fortresses of denial, but you cannot deceive your own cells. My body began to scream a truth so terrible, my mind refused to listen. It started with a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was a fatigue that had nothing to do with a lack of sleep, though I wasn't sleeping well either. I would sit in class, the teacher's voice a meaningless drone, and fight a desperate, losing battle to keep my eyelids from sliding shut. Then came the nausea. It would rise in waves in the morning, a sour, metallic sickness that made the thought of breakfast unbearable. I told myself it was stress, the constant anxiety, the fear The suffocating weight of the Sekretov course. It was making me sick. It had to be. I clung to that explanation with a desperate ferocity. But the symptoms persisted, becoming more insistent. One afternoon at the Andersons, Sarah had baked a batch of her famous gingerbread cookies. The warm, spicy scent that once would have felt like a hug now filled me with a roiling sickness. I had to mumble an excuse about a headache and retreat to the bathroom, where I stood over the sink, breathing deeply, my reflection pale and strange in the mirror. The denial held, tenuous but intact, until a cold Tuesday morning in January. I was at my desk, marking a due date on the small calendar I kept pinned to my bulletin board. My eyes drifted over the orderly grid of boxes. A date in December was circled in faint pencil. The memory was vague, but the feeling associated with it was not. I remembered the cramps, the relief. I let my eyes travel forward. The page for January was clean, unmarked. A cold electric shock went through me. My mind started racing, counting, calculating. I flipped the page back to December, then forward to January again. I counted the days on my fingers, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't possible. I was always regular. Always. But the numbers didn't lie. The relentless, unforgiving math of biology laid the truth bare. I was late. Not just a few days late. I was weeks late. The fortress of denial crumbled to dust in an instant. The exhaustion, the nausea, the strange metallic taste in my mouth all, the disparate, frightening symptoms snapped into a single, coherent, and catastrophic picture. The blood drained from my face. The pen fell from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. It couldn't be. Please, God. No. For 3 days, I lived in a state of suspended panic, a frantic purgatory of hope and dread. I prayed for a sign, for a cramp, for any indication that my body had just glitched, that it was all a horrible mistake. But nothing came. The silence in my own body was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. I knew what I had to do. The thought of it was mortifying, but the not knowing was a torture I could no longer endure. I gathered the crumpled bills I had saved from my meagre allowance, shoved them deep into my pocket, and told my mother I was going to the library in the next town over to research a paper. The lie came easily now. Lying was the language I spoke best. The pharmacy in Northwood was sterile and bright, its aisles filled with strangers. I felt like every eye was on me, that the word pregnant was tattooed on my forehead. My heart hammered against my ribs as I found the aisle I was looking for. I grabbed a small, anonymous-looking box, paid for it with trembling hands at a checkout lane, manned by a bored-looking teenager who didn't even glance at me, and fled. Back home, I locked myself in the bathroom, the one room in the house with a lock I could trust. My hands shook so badly I could barely tear the box open. The plastic test stick felt alien in my hand, a clinical instrument of judgment. I read the instructions, my eyes scanning the words without really absorbing them. My entire future, my entire life, had been reduced to a 3-minute wait in this cold, silent bathroom. I did what the instructions told me to do. I placed the test on the edge of the sink, the little window facing up, and I waited. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the small blank window, willing it, praying it, to remain empty. First, a single line appeared in the control window. My heart gave a hopeful leap. One line is negative. One line is negative. But my eyes were glued to the other window, the one that would decide my fate. And then I saw it. A faint, ghost-like shadow at first, then slowly, cruelly, darkening into a solid, undeniable line. A perfect, perpendicular cross. A positive sign. The air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. My legs gave out from under me, and I slid down the cool porcelain of the bathtub until I was sitting on the cold, unforgiving tiles of the floor. The test stick clattered from my fingers. I stared at the closed bathroom door, but I saw only the end of everything. The end of my childhood. The end of my dreams. The end of my life as I knew it. The secret was no longer a secret. It was a truth, an unmistakable biological truth. It was no longer a phantom that haunted my mind. It was a cluster of cells, dividing and growing inside of me. It had a heartbeat. It was real. This was not a nightmare I could wake up from. This was a 9-month sentence, and my own body had become the prison. And I was trapped inside it with the child of the monster I was forced to call a family friend. For a week, I lived with the anchor in my gut. The knowledge of the life growing inside me was a dense, heavy thing, pulling me down into a dark, silent abyss of despair. The world continued on around me. School bells rang. My parents asked mindless questions about my day. The snow continued to fall outside my window, but I was no longer a part of it. I was adrift in my own private, terrifying ocean, and I was drowning. There is a point in drowning when your survival instinct makes one last, desperate lunge for the surface. After days of paralyzing fear, a frantic, irrational hope began to flicker within me. Lily, my best friend. Yes, she had dismissed my discomfort. She had defended her father with a furious loyalty. But she hadn't known the whole truth. She didn't know the full, horrifying scope of it. If she knew, if she truly, truly knew what had happened, what was happening inside me, she would believe me. She had to. The love we shared, the years of sisterhood, had to be stronger than the lie she had been living. She was my only hope, my last hope. I went to my best friend with the most horrific truth of my life, seeking a lifeline. She handed me an anchor. I chose a Saturday afternoon. I knew her parents would be out. David was at his weekend golf game, and Sarah was at her book club. Lily would be alone. The walk to her house, a path I had taken thousands of times, felt like a journey to a foreign land. Every step was heavy, my legs clumsy, logs of wood. My heart beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. When I reached her front door, I had to lean against the frame for a moment, gathering the last of my courage before knocking. Lily opened the door with a bright smile, a smile that faltered slightly when she saw my face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Come in, it's freezing out there. She led me up to her bedroom. It was exactly as it always was. Pristine, bathed in the clean white light of the winter sun, reflecting off the snow outside. A soft rock song was playing from her record player. Magazines were fanned out on her perfectly made bed. It was a haven of peaceful, privileged girlhood. It felt like a sacrilege to bring my ugly, broken reality into this perfect space. "What's up?" she asked, flopping onto her bed and patting the space next to her. "You've been so quiet all week." I sat stiffly on the edge of the mattress, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. I couldn't look at her. I focused on a patch of sunlight on her braided rug. A small, warm square in a world that had gone completely cold. "Lily," I began, my voice a choked whisper. "I have to tell you something, and you have to promise you'll listen. Just listen to all of it before you say anything." She sat up, her expression shifting from casual friendliness to wary curiosity. "Okay," she said slowly. "You're scaring me, Em." The tears came then. Before I could even speak the words, they spilled over, hot and silent, tracing paths down my frozen cheeks. "It's your dad!" I managed to get out, the words ripping through my throat. I saw her body tense, her face instantly hardening. "What about him?" she asked, her voice clipped. "He's been, for months, he's been hurting me," I sobbed. the words tumbling out in a messy, incoherent rush. That night of the biology project, and other times, he corners me when no one is around. I couldn't say the words, but she knew. I could see in her eyes that she understood what I was implying. I saw a flicker of horror, quickly extinguished, and replaced by a cold, hard wall of denial. "Stop it, Emma," she said, her voice dangerously low. "No, please. You promised you would listen," I begged, looking up at her, my vision blurred with tears. "It's not all. Lily, the reason I've been sick, the reason I'm so scared. Lily, I'm pregnant." The room went completely still. The only sound was the soft crackle of the record player. Lily stared at me, her face a blank mask of shock. For a single, fleeting second, I allowed myself to hope. I thought the sheer, biological horror of my statement would break through her defenses. I was wrong. The shock on her face did not melt into empathy. It crystallized into a furious, glacial rage. "You're lying," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden, violent fury. "I'm not, Lily, I swear," I cried, reaching for her hand, but she snatched it away as if I were diseased. "You are a liar," she screamed, leaping off the bed. She began to pace the room like a caged animal, her movements sharp and agitated. "I can't believe you. I can't believe you would come into my house, into my room, and tell such a disgusting, sick lie. It's not a lie. Why would I lie about this? Why?" She spun around to face me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "For attention, for money, to break up my family. That's why. You have always been jealous of me, jealous of what I have. You have this pathetic little life in that sad, quiet house, and you couldn't stand that I was happy." "That's not true," I wailed, the accusation striking me with the force of physical blows. "Isn't it? You come in here and you accuse my father of this filth. You're the filthy one. You probably went and got yourself knocked up by some boy at school, and now you're too scared to admit it, so you decided to blame him. You're trying to ruin him because he's a good man, because he was kind to you." Her voice rose to a fever pitch. "You seduced him. That has to be it. You threw yourself at him, and now you're trying to trap him, trying to tear our family apart. You are a monster, Emma, a venomous little snake that we welcomed into our home, and this is how you repay us." I just sat there on the edge of her bed, my body shaking, absorbing the verbal onslaught. Each word was another turn of the knife. Liar, slut, gold digger, snake. She was methodically destroying me, tearing down every last shred of my dignity, my credibility, my very sense of self. "I hate you," she finally spat out, her chest heaving, her face contorted in a mask of pure loathing. "I want you to get out of my room. Get out of my house. I never want to see you again." Her final words were delivered with a cold, absolute finality. The fire of her rage had burned out, leaving behind only the icy certainty of her judgment. I was guilty, sentenced, exiled. Numbly, I stood up. My legs felt disconnected from my body. I walked out of her bedroom, the sanctuary that was now the site of my deepest betrayal. I walked down the familiar stairs, my hand trailing on the banister that I had slid down 100 times in laughter. I walked past the living room where I had felt so safe, past the kitchen where Sarah had baked me cookies. It was all a mirage. None of it had ever been real. I let myself out the front door into the blindingly bright, cold air. The anchor she had handed me was now firmly tied to my feet. I was at the bottom of that dark ocean, and the weight of her hatred, her accusations, her absolute and total betrayal was pressing down on me, crushing the very last bit of air from my lungs. The pain of it was sharper, more acute than anything David had ever done to me. He had violated my body, But in that sunlit room, my best friend, my sister, had deliberately and methodically annihilated my soul. The silence in the car on the way home from Lily's house was a void. I stared out the window at the passing landscape of my childhood, the familiar houses, the snow-covered trees, the town square, but I didn't see them. I saw only the scorched earth of my life. I had confessed my deepest wound, and in return, I had been convicted of a crime I didn't commit. But I was naive. I thought the verdict was a private one, delivered in the court of Lily's bedroom. I didn't understand that my trial had been a sham, and my public sentencing was about to begin. David and Lily were not amateurs. They didn't wait for me to speak. They understood that the first story told is the one that sticks. They went on the offensive. That day, I lost more than a friend. I lost my home, my reputation, my name. In the small, tightly knit world of Havenwood, Vermont, David Anderson was a saint, and I had just been cast as the serpent in his garden. The change when I walked into school on Monday was immediate and seismic. It was a physical force, a wall of whispers and hostile stares that hit me the moment I stepped through the doors. The hallway parted around me as if I were carrying a contagion. Conversations stopped as I approached, only to resume in hushed, venomous tones the moment I passed. I saw a girl I had known since kindergarten point at me, her mouth forming a cruel word I couldn't hear but felt in my bones. At my locker, I found the word slut scratched into the blue paint with the sharp point of a compass. At lunch, I sat at my usual table, and one by one, the other girls picked up their trays and moved, leaving me in a circle of empty seats. Across the cafeteria, I saw Lily. She was holding court, surrounded by a phalanx of her most loyal friends. She was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, playing the part of the wounded, betrayed best friend to perfection. She looked over at me, her eyes filled with a righteous, public sorrow that was far more damning than her private rage had been. She had crafted her narrative, and I was its villain. I was the unstable, promiscuous girl who had betrayed her trust with a vicious, unbelievable lie. The final, crushing blow came that evening. When I got home, my parents were waiting for me in the living room. They weren't angry, they weren't yelling. It was far worse. They were sitting in a state of quiet, profound shame, and it was all directed at me. "Emma," my father began, his voice flat and tired. "We received a call from David and Sarah Anderson this afternoon." My mother wrung her hands in her lap, unable to look at me. "They are so worried about you," she said, her voice trembling with disappointment. And then they laid it all out. The masterfully constructed story the Andersons had fed them. How I had developed an unhealthy infatuation. How I had been acting erratically for months. How I had come to their home and told a terrible, confused story about their family. David and Sarah were heartbroken, they'd said. They saw me as a daughter, and they were desperate for me to get the help that I need. They were the victims, forced to defend themselves against the tragic delusions of a troubled girl they had so generously taken under their wing. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of manipulation, and my parents, who so admired the Andersons' standing and charm, bought every word. "Did you ask?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Did you even ask for my side?" "What side is there, Emma?" my father asked, his voice heavy with a weariness that felt ancient. "You've accused a good man, a family that has been nothing but kind to you, of something monstrous. You've embarrassed us. You've embarrassed yourself. We don't know what to think, other than that you are deeply, deeply confused." They never asked if I was pregnant. The Andersons had likely omitted that part of the story, as it was the one piece of physical evidence that could potentially give me credibility. They had focused solely on character assassination, and it had worked perfectly. I stood in my own living room, and I was an outcast. My own parents looked at me and saw not their daughter, but a source of shame, a problem that needed to be managed. The town became a prison. Every face was a judge, every whisper a sentence. The kindly woman at the library suddenly couldn't find my library card. The man at the corner store who used to give me free candy now counted my change into my hand, without a word, refusing to meet my eyes. I was a ghost, haunting a town that had already buried me. One afternoon, I saw him. I was walking home, taking a back street to avoid the main thoroughfares, and his car was parked there. He was leaning against it, waiting. My blood ran cold. I thought he was going to threaten me again, but he didn't have to. The war was already over, and he had won. He just watched me approach, a small, knowing, triumphant smile on his face. It wasn't a smile of charm or warmth. It was the cold, satisfied smile of a predator who has successfully isolated his prey from the herd, who now had nothing left to fear. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, got into his car, and drove away, leaving me standing alone on the empty street, choking on the totality of my defeat. The final conversation with my parents was quiet and swift. Perhaps, my mother suggested a few days later, her eyes fixed on a point over my shoulder. It would be for the best if you had a fresh start, somewhere else. She was talking about a distant aunt who lived in a city hundreds of miles away, a woman I barely knew. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. They were not sending me away for my own good. They were exporting their shame, sweeping their problem under a rug so large it spanned 3 states. I didn't argue. I had no fight left in me. That night, I packed a single bag in the silence of my bedroom. I folded my sweaters, my jeans, a couple of books. It was a pathetic collection, the sum total of a life that no longer existed. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known. But it wasn't an escape. An escape implies you are running toward freedom. This was an exile. I was being cast out into the wilderness, a pariah branded with lies. I was 17 years old, pregnant, and utterly alone, with nothing to my name but the clothes on my back, the shame they had dressed me in, and the monstrous, living secret that was growing, day by day, in the darkness inside me. For 20 years, I focused on one thing: survival. It was a simple, brutal, all-consuming task. I left Havenwood as a girl and arrived in a sprawling, indifferent city as a pariah, carrying nothing but a small bag and a world of shame. My aunt took me in, her charity as thin and grey as the smoke from her constant cigarettes. I was a problem, a whispered disgrace she housed out of a distant sense of familial duty. The loneliness of that time was a physical entity, a cold weight that settled in my bones and never truly left. Then Noah was born. In a stark, anonymous hospital room, under the hum of fluorescent lights, they placed him in my arms. He was so small, so perfect, his tiny fingers curling around one of mine. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The vast, empty cavern of my despair was suddenly filled with a love so fierce, so powerful. It was terrifying. Looking at his face, all the shame, all the fear, all the pain inflicted by David, Lily, and my own parents became secondary. My life was no longer about what had been done to me. It was about him. He was my reason, my purpose, my survival. I raised my son, Noah, and I poured into him all the love I had been denied. Our life was a constant struggle. I worked a string of low-wage jobs waitressing late at night, cleaning offices before dawn, stocking shelves in a 24-hour grocery store. I lived in a series of small, cramped apartments in neighborhoods where sirens were the local lullaby. There were nights I went to bed hungry so he could have a full stomach. Winters I wore threadbare coats so he could have new boots. But our home, no matter how small, was never silent or cold like the one I grew up in. It was filled with books we read aloud, with his laughter, with the steadfast, unwavering warmth of my love for him. He was a good boy, kind, smart, and observant, with a gentle soul that seemed a miracle given the violent secret of his conception. But there was a private pain I could never escape, a constant flickering ghost in the background of our life. It was in his eyes. He had my hair, my smile, but he had David Anderson's eyes. They were the same shade of deep forest green, with the same flecks of gold. Sometimes, when he would look up at me in a certain light, or laugh at a joke, I would see a flicker of the man who had destroyed my life. I would feel a physical jolt, a nauseating lurch in my stomach where my love for my son collided with my revulsion for his father. I learned to live with it, to push the feeling down, to separate the innocent child from the monstrous source. But it was a constant reminder. It was the universe's cruelest joke, ensuring that even in my greatest joy, I could never fully escape my deepest trauma. It was a constant reminder that my story wasn't finished. The truth doesn't die just because you bury it. For 2 decades, I kept it buried. I told Noah a simple, edited version of the truth, that his father was not a good person, and he had left before he was born. It was a flimsy shield, but it was all I could offer. I was focused on moving forward, on building a life so far from the ruins of Havenwood that its ghosts could never reach us. The catalyst that changed everything wasn't a sudden event, but a quiet conversation on a Tuesday evening. Noah was 20 now, home from his classes at the local university. He was tall and thoughtful, a man in his own right. We were sitting in the small, comfortable living room of the apartment we'd lived in for years, the first place that had ever felt truly stable. He turned down the volume on the television and looked at me, his expression serious. "Mom," he began, his voice gentle. "Can we talk? For real?" I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. "Of course. What is it?" "It's about my father," he said. My breath caught. He saw my reaction and quickly continued. "It's okay. I'm not trying to upset you, but I'm not a kid anymore. The story you told me, it was enough when I was little, but it's not enough anymore." He leaned forward, his green eyes, not David's, filled with a deep, earnest compassion that made my heart ache. "I see the sadness in you sometimes, Mom. It's always there, just under the surface, especially when you think I'm not looking. I know something terrible happened. I don't need the details if you can't give them to me, but I need to know who I am, who you are. I want to know your story, our story. I'm strong enough to handle it, I promise." I looked at my son, this beautiful, kind, wonderful man I had raised from nothing. He wasn't asking out of morbid curiosity. He was asking because he loved me, because he could see the shadow of the anchor tied to my soul, and he wanted to help me carry the weight. And in that moment, 20 years of carefully constructed silence shattered. The fear I had lived with for so long, fear of the truth, fear of the shame, fear of David Anderson, was suddenly overshadowed by a new, powerful conviction. This boy, my son, deserved more than a life built on a foundation of lies and shame. He deserved the dignity of his own story, even a painful one. My silence, which had once been a shield to protect myself, now felt like a prison I had locked us both inside. I had spent 2 decades surviving. Now, it was time to fight back. I didn't give him the details that night. I just looked at him, tears welling in my eyes for the first time in years, and I nodded. "You're right," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You deserve the truth, and I'm going to make sure you get it." After he went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet living room for hours, the past rising up to meet me, not as a terrifying monster, but as a challenge. The ghosts of Havenwood had haunted me in the dark for long enough. It was time I turned on the lights. The sleeping giant, the frightened girl who had run away so long ago, was finally, irrevocably awake. And she was going home. I learned a valuable lesson in the weeks that followed my decision, a truth that applies to most of the dark things in this world. Monsters are rarely creative. They are creatures of habit, of compulsion. They do not invent new methods of cruelty for each victim. They have a pattern, a script they follow time and time again. My entire life had been shaped by the belief that my story was a singular, unique horror. The first step toward freedom was the chilling, empowering realization that I was probably wrong. I just had to find who else fit his pattern. My first call was not to Havenwood, but to a name I found after hours of research at the city library. I was looking for a specific kind of lawyer, not a bombastic courtroom brawler, but someone quiet, sharp, and experienced in the delicate art of unearthing buried truths. The name I landed on was Evelyn Reed. Her website was understated, professional, and it mentioned her work with victims of trauma. Making the call was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My hand trembled as I dialed, my voice a dry, reedy thing as I requested an appointment. But I did not hang up. Evelyn Reed's office was on the 12th floor of a downtown building, with a view of the city that seemed a world away from the claustrophobic confines of my past. The space was modern and calm, decorated in soothing greys and blues. Miss Reed herself was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a stillness that commanded respect. She didn't rush me. She offered me a glass of water, sat opposite me in a comfortable chair, and simply said, "Please, tell me your story. Start wherever you like." And so, for the first time in over 20 years, I told it all. I unburdened myself of the entire, sordid history, from the first inappropriate compliment to the final, shattering accusation in Lily's bedroom. I told her about the exile, the birth of my son, the constant, painful reminder in his eyes. I spoke for nearly an hour, my voice sometimes breaking, my hands twisting a paper napkin into a shredded mess. Throughout it all, she listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't take copious notes. She just listened, her gaze unwavering and empathetic. When I finally finished, the silence in the room was heavy with the weight of my life's secret. I waited for the flicker of doubt, the professional skepticism. It never came. "I believe you, Emma," she said, her voice calm and certain. The words, so simple, so direct, landed with the force of a physical impact. It was the first time anyone, other than my son, had heard my truth and not called me a liar. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry welled in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "Now," she said, her tone shifting from empathetic listener to sharp strategist. "We need to be realistic. The statute of limitations for any criminal charges ran out decades ago, and a civil suit against a man with David Anderson's reputation and resources, based on a single decades-old accusation, would be difficult. He would paint you exactly as he did before. Unstable, vindictive. What we need is to destroy his most powerful weapon, the idea that this was an isolated event. We need to find a pattern. A pattern." The word resonated with the truth I had already begun to suspect. So, our hunt began. It was a strange, ghostly kind of investigation. We sat in Miss Reed's quiet office, sifting through the ghosts of Havenwood. We obtained old yearbooks, poring over the faces of girls who had been in my class. We found digitized town directories and made lists of young women who had worked at David's bank, looking for anyone who had left their job abruptly. And we made a list of the Andersons' domestic help: gardeners, cleaners, housekeepers, people who were inside that house, but who were also vulnerable, often invisible. There was one name that stood out: Maria Flores. She had worked for them for less than a year, the year before my own ordeal began in earnest. According to the records Miss Reed unearthed, she had moved away suddenly, Miss Reed made the first call. It was brief and unproductive. Maria, who was now Maria Jensen, and living a quiet life in a town 2 hours from Havenwood, was terrified. She insisted she knew nothing and hung up. "She's scared," Evelyn said, looking at me. He bought her silence, and she's afraid of what will happen if she breaks the terms of that deal. "I can have an investigator approach her." "But, no," I said, a new resolve hardening in my chest. "I have to do it. She needs to see me. She needs to know she's not alone." The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a small, anonymous coffee shop off a highway exit, far from Havenwood and far from Maria's new life. I saw her before she saw me. She was an older woman now, her hair streaked with grey, her face etched with the lines of a life that had not been easy. She sat clutching her purse, her eyes nervously darting around the room. She looked like a frightened bird, ready to take flight at the slightest provocation. I walked to her table and sat down. "Maria," I said softly. "I'm Emma." She flinched at my name, her eyes wide with fear and something else I recognized. Recognition. He had likely told her about me. The troubled girl who came after her. "I don't know why I agreed to this," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I have nothing to say. I didn't push. I didn't demand. I simply looked at this woman, another survivor of the same shipwreck, and I began to tell my story. I told her about the compliments that felt wrong, the way he would stand too close in the hallways, the way he made you feel like you were the crazy one. I told her about the night in the den. As I spoke, I saw a profound change come over her. Her fear did not vanish, but it was joined by the shadow of a shared memory. The guarded tension in her shoulders began to sag. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "The study," she whispered when I had finished. For me, it was in his study. He told me I had missed a spot dusting. Her voice was barely audible, thick with a shame that was 45 years old. "He was so charming at first, so kind. He made me feel special. And then—" She trailed off, unable to speak the words. She didn't have to. "He told me I was his second daughter," I said quietly. "He told me I was part of the family," she replied. We sat in silence for a moment, the echoes of our two stories, so terrifyingly similar, filling the space between us. "I got pregnant," she said, her voice cracking. "I told him. I thought he would help me. But he gave me money. A lot of money. More money than I had ever seen. He told me to take care of my problem and to leave town and never come back. He said if I ever told anyone, he would ruin me." She began to sob. A quiet, desperate sound. "I lost the baby on my own, a month later. But I kept the money. I was so scared. I used it to build a new life, and I have been hiding ever since." I reached across the table and placed my hand over her trembling ones. Her skin was cold. "You don't have to hide anymore, Maria," I said. For the first time, she looked directly at me, her eyes meeting mine. In them, I saw my own pain, my own fear, my own shame, reflected back at me. I was no longer a singular voice crying in the wilderness. The whispers were no longer just in my head. They now had an echo. They had corroboration. We were two. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt the unmistakable, thrilling surge of power. The hunt had just begun. The decision to return to Havenwood was not made lightly. It was a calculated, strategic move, planned with the cool precision of a military campaign. Evelyn Reed and I went over the details for weeks. We knew that a quiet legal filing would be met with a wall of high-priced lawyers and public denials. David's power was his reputation. His stage was the town itself. To defeat him, I had to confront him on that stage, in front of the very audience that had applauded him for half a century. We learned that his family was throwing him a lavish party for his 70th birthday. It was perfect. A celebration of the man, the myth, the lie. It was there that the truth would finally make its appearance. They thought I was a ghost from the past, a faded memory of some forgotten scandal. They were about to find out I was the storm they never saw coming. The drive back to Havenwood was surreal. The familiar green signs on the highway, the winding country roads, the landscape that was so deeply ingrained in my memory, it was all the same, yet I was profoundly different. The terrified, broken girl who had fled in a bus in the dead of night was gone. In her place was a woman who had survived, who had raised a son, and who was now returning not as a victim seeking pity, but as a creditor coming to collect a debt that was 45 years overdue. Fear was still there. A cold knot in my stomach. But it was overshadowed by a larger, colder resolve. The Anderson house on Maple Street was lit up like a beacon, every window glowing with warm, celebratory light. Luxury cars lined the street. Through the large bay window, I could see a crowd of well-dressed people, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter a faint, cheerful murmur. The house itself, my former sanctuary and prison, looked exactly the same. "Are you ready?" Evelyn asked from the passenger seat. Her voice calm and steady. "Yes," I said. And I was. We walked up the stone path, two soberly dressed women in black, amidst a sea of festive colour. We didn't knock. I simply opened the front door, and we stepped inside. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of silence rippled out from the doorway. The string quartet that had been playing in the corner faltered, the notes dying in the suddenly thick air. Conversations trailed off. Heads turned. I saw faces I recognized. People who were my parents' age, now elderly. Their children, who were my age, now middle-aged. I saw confusion, then dawning recognition, then open hostility in their eyes. The serpent had returned to the garden. And then I saw them. David, Sarah, and Lily, standing near the fireplace, the center of their adoring universe. David, older now, his hair a distinguished silver, looked thinner but still radiated that same powerful charm. Lily, polished and elegant, was at his side, the ever-devoted daughter. And Sarah, my God! Sarah looked like she had been holding the same frightened breath for 45 years. Lily saw me first. Her smile froze on her face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. She whispered something to her father. David turned. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes, the animal fear of the predator who has just heard the snap of a trap. Then, in an instant, it was gone, replaced by the mask of a genial, confused host. He began to walk toward me, his smile wide and false. "Well, this is a surprise," he began, his voice booming for all to hear. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I didn't answer him. I let him get closer. My eyes locked on his. I waited until the room was completely silent, until every guest had turned to watch this strange, uncomfortable drama unfold. And then I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "I have something to say." I didn't wait for permission. I let my gaze sweep across the room, over the curious and hostile faces, before landing it squarely back on David. "My name is Emma Miller," I said. "Many of you knew me. A long time ago. You knew me as Lily's best friend, the girl who was like a second daughter to this family." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. 45 years ago, in this house, David Anderson began to systematically assault me. He used my trust and my love for this family to trap me. And when I became pregnant with his child, he and his daughter, Lily, created a vicious story that painted me as a liar and a slut. They destroyed my reputation and drove me from this town so he could protect his secret. A collective gasp went through the room. The air was electric with shock and outrage. David's face was a mask of horrified indignation. "This is preposterous," he boomed, his voice shaking with feigned rage. "This woman is unwell. She has been harboring these delusions for years. This is slander." Lily rushed to his side, her face a contorted mask of fury. "Get out!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How dare you? How dare you come into our home and ruin my father's 70th birthday with your sick, twisted fantasies? Someone call the police. Get her out of here." The guests erupted in a chorus of support for the Andersons. "Shameful," someone yelled. "Get out," another shouted. They began to close in, a well-dressed mob ready to defend their saint and cast out the demon who had dared to challenge him. But I did not move. I stood my ground, my quiet lawyer at my side, a silent testament that this was no hysterical outburst. I looked past Lily's rage, past the anger of the crowd, and I locked eyes with David. He was still playing the part of the outraged victim. But I could see the truth behind the performance. I could see the panic churning in his eyes, the frantic calculations of a guilty man caught in a spotlight he could not escape. "I am not the one who is lying, David," I said, my voice dropping yet carrying with more weight than all their shouting combined. "And you know it." The room was in chaos. Lily was screaming for someone to remove me. The guests were murmuring their disgust. David was blustering about lawsuits. It was my word against his, and in Havenwood, his word had always been gospel. It seemed, for a moment, that history was doomed to repeat itself, that I would be thrown out once more, my truth silenced by the sheer force of their denial. But this time, I had not come alone, and the storm I had brought with me had only just begun to break. All eyes were on Lily's rage and David's lies. The room was a cacophony of accusation and denial, a storm of self-righteous fury swirling around me. The guests, my jury, had already reached their verdict, their faces a uniform mask of condemnation. It was happening all over again. I had walked back into the fire, and it was about to consume me. But my gaze wasn't on David's blustering performance or Lily's shrieking defense. I was watching Sarah, the silent one. For 45 years, she had been a ghost in her own life, a creature of quiet compliance. But in that moment, under the weight of this public reckoning, the ghost was beginning to look solid. Her face was ashen, her knuckles white where she gripped the back of a chair. And in her eyes, I saw the one thing more damning than guilt. I saw knowledge. Lily was directly in front of me now, her face inches from mine, her words a spray of venom. "You are nothing, a pathetic, jealous nothing, and I will not let you destroy him." "Lily, that's enough," David said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder, playing the part of the calm, reasonable man trying to control an emotional situation. "Let's just have this person removed." It was then that the silence broke. "Stop." The word was not a shout, but a raw, ragged cry, torn from the depths of a long, suffocated soul. It sliced through the noise of the room, instantly silencing Lily's tirade, David's blustering, and the angry murmurs of the crowd. Every head turned. Sarah Anderson stood trembling, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that was finally spilling over. "Sarah, for God's sake, pull yourself together." David hissed, his voice a low, urgent warning. "This woman has upset you." But Sarah seemed not to hear him. She lowered her hand, her gaze finding mine across the crowded room. "Just stop," she whispered again, tears beginning to stream down her pale cheeks. "All of it. Stop." She took a shaky breath, and the confession she had swallowed for a lifetime began to pour out of her in a broken, rambling torrent. "I knew," she sobbed, her voice gaining a hysterical strength. "I didn't know," This. Not all of it. But I knew something was wrong. I saw the way you looked at her, David. At Emma. At the other girls from town. The young ones. The pretty ones. She's hysterical, David said loudly to the room, trying to regain control. This has been a terrible shock. No, Sarah cried, turning on him. I saw it, and I said nothing. I chose my beautiful house and my comfortable life, and I said nothing. I was a coward. Oh God, I have been such a coward. It was a stunning admission, and it sent a fresh shockwave through the room. Lily stared at her mother, her expression of righteous fury collapsing into bewildered confusion. Mom, what are you talking about? But Sarah's eyes had a distant, haunted look. She seemed to be acting on an impulse that had been suppressed for decades. She turned away from the crowd and, like a woman in a trance, began to walk towards the back of the house, towards David's study. The crowd parted for her. A silent, human sea. Sarah, where are you going? David called after her, his voice no longer booming with indignation, but sharp with a new, rising panic. Stop this nonsense right now. Come back here. She didn't look back. She pushed open the door to the study and disappeared inside. We all stood, frozen, listening to the muffled sounds of a drawer being opened, a key turning in a lock. A moment later, she reappeared in the doorway. In her hands, she held a small, dark object, a leather-bound journal. She walked back to the center of the room, her steps unsteady but her purpose absolute. She stopped in front of me and Evelyn. She held out the journal, her hands shaking so violently I thought she would drop it. I found this in his desk drawer 30 years ago, she said, her voice a dead, hollow whisper. After another girl from the bank left town suddenly. I read things, and then I locked it away. I put it in the bottom of my mother's old hope chest, and I hid it. I hid it because I was afraid. David let out a choked, strangled sound. His face, which had been red with feigned rage, had gone a waxy, sickly white. Sarah, no. Evelyn Reed stepped forward and gently took the journal from Sarah's trembling hands. There was a small, faded ribbon marking a page. She opened it. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb, a journal entry, Evelyn announced. Her voice calm, professional, and devastatingly clear. She began to read. The 16th of November. A cold, rainy night. The girl was here, finishing some project for Lily. So young, so trusting. That is the most potent part. The trust, to see it in their eyes just before it breaks. She was terrified, of course. Pleaded a little at the end. It only heightened the experience. She is like a piece of soft clay, pliable. She will be silent. She is too afraid, too ashamed, and too in love with the idea of our family to ever speak. She is mine now. Evelyn looked up from the page. The only sound in the room was the ragged, panicked rasp of David Anderson's breathing. The journal was not a confession. It was a trophy, the proud, narcissistic chronicle of a predator. Then, Lily made a sound. It was not a word, but a short, sharp, wounded cry, like an animal that has just been mortally wounded. Her eyes, wide with dawning, catastrophic horror, darted from the journal in Evelyn's hand, to her father's ashen, guilty face, to her mother's weeping, broken form. The perfect painting of her life had not just been revealed to have a spot of rot. The entire canvas had just been set on fire, right before her eyes. The man she had worshipped, the father she had destroyed her best friend to protect, was a monster. And the proof was not in my words, but in his own, and it had been delivered by the hand of her own mother. The guests stood like statues of salt, their faces pale with shock and dawning comprehension. The saint of Havenwood was a demon, and they had all been his acolytes. In the centre of the ruin, I stood perfectly still. The storm had passed. The noise was over, and in the dead, echoing silence that followed, all that was left was the terrible, undeniable, and finally, inescapable truth. Vengeance is a fire that burns you as much as your enemy. For years I had imagined this moment, and in my daydreams it was always fiery. It was a blaze of righteous anger, a conflagration of justice that would feel triumphant. But as I stood in the ruins of David Anderson's life, the ashes of his reputation settling around us in the silent, horrified room, I felt no heat. I didn't want fire. I had wanted peace. Their self-destruction was just a byproduct. The silence that followed the reading of the journal was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the life, out of the room. David Anderson, the titan, the pillar, had shrunk into a stooped, grey old man, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Lily stood frozen, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror, as if she had just witnessed the sun falling from the sky. And Sarah wept, her body shaking with the force of a grief that was 45 years old. Then, the spell broke. It began not with a bang, but with a quiet shuffle. One of the guests, a man who had been loudly defending David only moments before, discreetly backed toward the door. Then another, and another. Soon, it was a silent, hurried exodus. No one said goodbye. No one offered condolences. They fled the house as if it were contaminated, their faces averted, their shame palpable. They were not just fleeing a monster. They were fleeing their own complicity, their own willful blindness. Within minutes, the grand living room, once filled with laughter and celebration, was empty, save for the wreckage of a family. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Our work here is done, Emma," she said quietly. "We walked out of that house, leaving them to drown in the truth. We stayed at a small, clean hotel in a neighbouring town. I didn't need to be in Havenwood to feel the shockwaves." Evelyn kept me updated. The story had torn through the town with the speed and ferocity of a tornado. The local paper, timid at first, ran a story citing allegations and the fact that David had been asked to step down from his position on the hospital board and the bank's board of directors. His name was being quietly scraped off plaques all over town. The house of cards, built over a lifetime with lies and charm, had collapsed in a single night. I felt a quiet, grim sense of finality, but not joy. It was the feeling of a surgeon who has just completed a long and painful operation. The cancer had been removed. The patient might not survive, but the disease was gone. 3 days after the party, there was a soft knock on my hotel room door. I opened it to find Lily. If I was a ghost from the past, she was a ghost of the present. She was gaunt, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Her once perfect hair was unkempt, and her expensive clothes were rumpled, as if she had been sleeping in them. She looked utterly, completely broken. "Emma," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her enter. She stood in the middle of the impersonal room, looking lost. "I'm so sorry," she began, the words stumbling out, choked with self-loathing. "Sorry isn't the right word. There is no word. What I did to you, what I said, I was so stupid. I was so blind." Tears began to stream down her face, but they were not the performative tears I had seen at the funeral. These were real, agonizing tears of shame. "I defended him. I hated you. I threw you away. I don't know how I can ever How you can ever. She trailed off, her sobs overwhelming her. She was looking for something from me. Forgiveness. Absolution. A comforting word that would lessen the crushing weight of her guilt. She wanted me to make her feel better. I looked at this woman who was once the other half of my soul, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction. I just felt a vast, quiet distance. The person she had wronged, the girl she had destroyed, was gone. The apology you owe is to the 16-year-old girl you threw to the wolves, I said, my voice calm and even. She can't hear you anymore. Lily looked up at me, her face a mess of confusion and pain. I'm not that girl anymore, Lily, I continued gently. I can't give you what you're looking for. I can't absolve you. That is a weight you have to carry. You have to live with what you did, just like I had to. The finality in my voice was absolute. The door to our shared past, which she had slammed in my face so long ago, was now a door I was quietly closing and locking from my side. She seemed to understand. She gave a single, jerky nod, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked out of my room without another word. The next morning, I packed my small bag. I was ready to go home. To my real home. To Noah. I stood at the window of my hotel room and looked out in the direction of Havenwood. I could almost picture the town, nestled in the winter hills, reeling from the scandal, rewriting its own history. But it held no power over me now. The faces that had once judged me, the whispers that had haunted me, were all meaningless. The ghosts had been confronted. The house of cards was a pile of rubble on the ground. I turned away from the window, picked up my bag, and walked out of the room. I was not being exiled this time. I was not fleeing. I was simply leaving a place that was no longer a part of my story, walking away from the ruins, finally and completely free. The journey home was quiet. The world outside the car window was just a blur of motion. The storm had passed, the ruins of Havenwood were behind me, but there was one last piece of wreckage I needed to salvage. One last truth to be spoken. Not in a crowded room full of enemies and strangers, but in the quiet safety of my own home. After all the public declarations, the most important story had yet to be told, and it belonged to only one person. I spent a day writing it all down, sitting at my small kitchen table, the winter sun pale on the pages of a simple notebook. It was a letter to my son. My dearest Noah, I could feel him watch me from the living room couch as I wrote. He was giving me space, but his presence was a warm, steady anchor. For your entire life, you have asked me about your father, and for your entire life, I have given you a half-truth. I told you he was not a good man. That is true, but it is a shallow truth, a placid surface on a very deep and dark ocean. I did this not to deceive you, but to protect you. I see now that what I was really protecting was my own shame, and in doing so, I kept a part of your own story from you. You are a man now, and you deserve the dignity of the whole truth. It is ugly, and it is painful, but it is ours, and I will not hide from it anymore. That evening, I found him in the living room, reading. I sat in the armchair opposite him, the notebook in my hands. Noah, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I have something for you, something I need to share. He put his book down, giving me his full attention. His green eyes, me son's eyes, were full of gentle understanding. I took a deep breath and began to read the letter aloud. I told him everything. I told him about the lonely girl who found a sanctuary in her best friend's home. I told him about the charming, fatherly man who became her hero. Then, my voice faltering but never breaking, I told him how that hero became a monster. I spared him the most graphic details, but I did not spare the truth of the violation, of the manipulation, of the absolute terror and powerlessness I had felt. Your father was not a man I loved who then left. He was a man who took something from me by force, in the dark, when I was a child. He was a predator who hid behind the mask of a good man. Your conception was not an act of love, or even of passion. It was an act of violence. For a long time, I could not separate you from the horror of that act. As I read, I watched his face. I saw him process the information, his expression tightening with a pain that was for me, not for himself. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He listened. I told him about the pregnancy test on the cold bathroom floor. I told him about the confrontation in Lily's sunlit bedroom, and the vicious words she used to destroy me. I told him about the town that turned its back on me, and the parents who sent their shame into exile. For so many years I was afraid of you seeing that shame in me. More than that, I was terrified that you would feel it too. That you would feel that the violence of your beginning had somehow tainted you. I want to be perfectly clear, Noah. Nothing could be further from the truth. The moment they placed you in my arms in that hospital, you were not the embodiment of my trauma. You were the reason I survived it. I looked up from the page and saw tears glistening in his eyes. He reached across the space between us and took my free hand, his grip firm and warm. You need to understand this. That man, David Anderson, he does not get to claim you. His legacy is one of darkness and lies. You are not his legacy. You are mine. You are the product of every difficult choice I made after he tried to destroy me. You are the product of every double shift I worked, every late-night bus ride, every meal I skipped, every tear I shed in secret. You are the product of a love so fierce and so powerful it managed to grow in the most poisoned soil imaginable. You were never my shame, Noah. You have always been my greatest victory. I read the final lines, my voice thick with emotion. I am sorry for the years of silence. I am sorry for the half-truths. I am giving you the whole story now, painful as it is, because it belongs to you. It is the story of where you came from, but it does not define where you are going. Your life is your own, and it is a good one, because you are a good man. The best man I know. All my love. Forever? Mom. I finished reading. The notebook lay open in my lap. The silence in the room was no longer heavy with secrets, but clean, clear, and filled with a quiet understanding. Noah squeezed my hand. The tears in his eyes finally spilled over. But they were not tears of disgust, or anger, or shame. They were tears of profound love, of awe. Mom, he said, his voice thick. He moved from the couch and knelt in front of my chair, pulling me into a fierce hug. I buried my face in his shoulder, feeling the strength in him, the goodness. You're the strongest person I have ever known. He pulled back and looked at me, his green eyes clear. Thank you, he said, for telling me, for everything. I looked into his face, and for the first time I saw no shadow of David Anderson there at all. The ghost had been banished, vanquished by the truth. All I saw was my son, my victory, my beautiful, wonderful son. Our family story, once a thing of horror and shame, had been rewritten, and this new version, forged in love and resilience, was finally, truly, and completely our own. The past is a strange country. For the longest time, it was a place I was exiled from, a landscape of shadows and ghosts I never dared to revisit. Then, for a time, it was a battlefield, a place I had to return to wage a war I should never have had to fight. But now, all these years later, it is simply a place I once came from. It has no power over me. Its borders are closed. Its ghosts have faded. And I have, at long last, come home to myself. My home is a small house with a yard that I have spent the last 30 years turning into a garden. It is my sanctuary, my life's work. It is here, among the riotous, unruly life of the roses, and the quiet, steady strength of the oak tree I planted when Noah was just a boy, that I feel the most at peace. David Anderson took my youth, my friend, and my name. He plunged my life into a long, cold, and bitter winter. He, and all the others who enabled him, thought they had buried me under the frozen ground of their lies and shame. But they made a mistake. They forgot that some seeds only grow after a frost. The news from Havenwood reached me in trickles over the years, carried by Evelyn Reed, who remained a friend long after she was my lawyer. David lived out his last years in disgrace, a pariah in the town that once worshipped him. He died quietly, his funeral a sparsely attended affair, a pathetic postscript to a life of carefully concealed horror. Sarah passed away not long after, a woman who had finally spoken the truth but had never, I think, managed to forgive herself for her decades of silence. And Lily? Lily lives in the big house on Maple Street alone. She never married, never had children. She carries the weight of her family's sins, a lonely warden in a museum of her own making. I feel no triumph in this knowledge, only a profound, distant sadness for the girl she once was, the friend I once loved, before she made her terrible choice. The sound of a gate creaking open pulls me from my thoughts. I look up from the lavender bush I am pruning, my hands fragrant with its scent. Noah is walking up the path, his own 2 children, my grandchildren, running ahead of him. "Grandma!" yells 7-year-old Chloe, her face bright with excitement. She throws herself into my arms for a hug that smells of sunshine and graham crackers. Her older brother, Sam, follows at a more dignified pace, giving me a shy smile. "We brought you cookies," he says, holding up a small bag. "The best kind," I say, smiling back at him. Noah joins us, his face, now lined with the gentle creases of middle age, full of a familiar, easy love. He kisses my cheek. "The garden looks beautiful, Mom." "It's a work in progress," I say. It always is. We spend the afternoon together. I show Chloe how the snapdragons open and close their mouths. Sam helps me water the tomato plants, his face serious with concentration. We sit on the grass and eat the cookies, which are a little burnt on the bottom, and I declare them the most delicious I have ever tasted. We laugh. The sound of their laughter, my son's and his children's, is the most beautiful music in the world. It is the sound of a legacy of love, not of hate. Later, as the sun begins to set, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, Noah and I sit on the porch swing, watching the children chase fireflies at the edge of the yard. "Are you happy, Mom?" A asks quietly, his question simply but profound. I look at the beautiful life thriving all around me, the flowers turning their faces to the last of the light, the grandchildren, their small bodies flickering in and out of the twilight, their laughter echoing in the cooling air. I look at my son, this good, kind man, who was my reason for everything. "Yes, Noah," I say, my voice filled with a certainty that is as deep and rooted as the old oak tree. "I am. He took my spring. He stole my summer. He left me in a winter so cold and so long I thought I would never feel warmth again. But he was wrong. Life, against all odds, finds a way. You learn to tend the frozen ground. You learn to protect the fragile seedling. You learn that the scars you carry are not a map of your weakness, but a testament to your strength. And eventually, after a long, hard season of survival, you learn to bloom again. Here, in the quiet light of my life's evening, surrounded by the family that is my true story, I am finally at peace, in a garden of my own making. And it is, at last, in full and glorious bloom.